Hi, we have Thomas Cahill. He is the author of his latest book, Heretics and Heroes: How Renaissance Artists and Reformation Priests Created our World. It is book 6 in a projected 7-book series called Hinges of History. The first book was How the Irish Saved Civilization. Tom, thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
This is a big project. What do you mean by Hinges of History?
Well, the question that I asked myself in starting the series was, how did we in the Western world become the people that we are? Why do we think and feel the way we do, which is not the way everyone thinks and feels, or has always thought and felt. More and more, in our time, the West has become the world, but that wasn't always the case. And our sensibility and the way we view the world, no matter who we are, if we're in the West, we have a certain way of thinking and feeling that is unique to the Western world, though it has more and more been adopted by others. And so my question was really, how did this happen? It's perceptibly different from all other worldviews. So it's taking 7 books to answer the question.
I assume Hinges of History means you're finding axial points.
Yes.
In the development of Western civilization. And now we're at the Renaissance.
Renaissance and Reformation.
And Reformation, exactly. There would seem to be two things that are somewhat antithetical.
They are, but they occur in the same period. This was the hardest book to write, and I found out as I was writing it that no one tries to write about the Renaissance and the Reformation together because it's too hard. That's the reason. But they come out of the same source. The source is that at the end of the Middle Ages, you have people rediscovering the classical heritage of Europe, the Greco-Roman heritage, which had really been lost. By the beginning of this period, the beginning of the period that becomes the Renaissance and the Reformation, no Western European had read Greek for more than 1,000 years, even though the New Testament is written in Greek. That's its language. But it was lost, as so much was. And classical literature and poetry had been lost. Some people knew that it existed, but nobody had read Virgil, Caesar, Cicero. All those people were names, but they weren't current reading material. And of course, part of the problem with the Middle Ages, which is not their fault, is that books had to be transcribed. If you'd like to have a copy of the book that I have, you've got to hire a scribe.
Copy it by hand.
Yeah. Or copy it yourself, that's months and months of diligent labor, which not everybody was up to. All of a sudden in this period, and it's one of the things that makes the period, you have the invention of printing, which is just as transformative as the internet has been for us. It was dazzling. It overwhelmed the society that it started off from and just ran riot through Europe.
I want to get to the printing press in a moment, but you described the horrors of the Black Death. What was most striking to you about its effect on individuals, or the real impact it had on the flow of history? Of course, it was a terrible disaster that took the lives of millions of people.
Probably half of Europe died.
But didn't it also give rise to creativity?
Yes, well, what really, I suggested that it gave rise to the traveling salesman in a way. And that's largely what Columbus is. And people like him had never existed before because people lived in their little village and they stayed there. All of a sudden you woke up one morning and half of your neighbors were dead. I mean, it didn't, of course, happen that quickly, but it could feel that way. Yeah. And the people who lived across the road, who had farmed for years and years, well, they were no longer there. And you said to yourself, we shouldn't let those fields lie fallow. I should just expand my farming.
Uh-huh.
Maybe I could even develop a new business. Maybe we could package the fruit from our orchard and sell it to other people. The fact that so many people were dead meant that there was a tremendous amount of new opportunity for those who were still living. And it's the end of serfdom. Not immediately, not overnight, but you could no longer tell your serfs that they were going to work for you come hell or high water, and all they were going to get was a little bit of bread at the end of it. The serfs said, no, 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 no. No, you're going to pay us now. That's a whole new world. So that it drastically changed the economics of Europe.
Looking at this history, you must have encountered many surprises, many things that counter our general understanding of what happened. I wanted to ask, the Renaissance is thought of as an artistic period. To what extent was it also the result of economic changes?
The Renaissance is a period of genius. Geniuses are popping up all over the place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Why does that sometimes happen and sometimes not happen? I don't think anyone knows the answer to that, certainly including me. Why in the same period do you have Michelangelo and Leonardo and Botticelli and Caravaggio and 50 other people who are just sensationally brilliant, all going in different directions, and not just artists, but as I point out at the end of the book, I left out music, which really deserves to be in there, but you can only cover so many things, and lots of other things.
Literature as well.
Yes, and literature, of course, yeah. Right. So that, and I do that to some extent, but I don't think anyone knows why this happened. Why did it happen in Florence? Which it didn't even, to say that the Renaissance is an Italian phenomenon, it's a Florentian or Florentine phenomenon to begin with. And it remains that for a very long time. You could say it's an Italian phenomenon. You can't go beyond that. It's only later that the Germans and the Dutch and people like the English finally get in on the act.
Well, we've been taught since childhood about the Reformation, about the Renaissance, and how it gave rise to the modern world and recovered the classics and all that. So, how did the Reformation contribute to the modern world?
Well, it's part of in both instances you have this new development of personality. You have, for instance, Luther saying, "No, I say no. I say no."
Mm-hmm.
No one had done that before. No one had said "I" the way Luther said "I." And he said, "My conscience." Your what? My conscience. As if anybody cared about consciences before this. My conscience doesn't allow me to go along with this. I say no. It's shocking. But it's another form of this development of self that you also see in the Renaissance. It's a different kind of self because it requires special courage and special willingness to go against the mainstream. But in some ways, people like Michelangelo were going against the mainstream all along, just in a different way. So it really is a new sense of individuals that had never existed before in the history of the world.
Mm-hmm. The first printing press was an adaptation of a wine press?
Yeah.
Is that correct? I did not know that.
Well, partly that.
Yeah.
It was also, printing requires three inventions. You have to be able to form letters and put them in some sort of frame, and then you need a press to whack them. After you've inked them up, you need a press to whack them onto the page. And it was a wine press that Gutenberg converted slightly. Gutenberg really comes out of, he's a goldsmith, and he knew how to form So he could form letters in a hard material that would survive being whacked onto paper. I mean, a lot of things break up and don't last very long. So you've got lots of things going on there in order to create the possibility of even paper itself. I mean, you've got to be able to push lots and lots of paper through this development that keeps whacking the pages. When you see an old-fashioned printing press, it's really an interesting.
It's an amazing thing.
It looks like a Rube Goldberg invention. You say, this is how this is done, you know.
And it sufficed for centuries.
Yes, and it immediately changed everything because, for instance, Luther, when he makes his public no, he does it by putting out these, at least the first time he does it, he puts out these theses that, objecting to what the papacy is doing in Germany, which is selling indulgences. And he is able to get the Germans on his side because all of a sudden, throughout Germany, because very few people could read, in every public square, people are picking up these theses and reading them out as everybody stands around and listens. It couldn't have happened almost 2 days before that. Before the invention of printing press, you couldn't have had everyone in Germany and then everyone in the Western world knowing about it.
And religion is often seen as an oppressive force, but the translation of the Bible into vernacular languages was a hugely liberating development.
Well, it did many things. Probably one of the most lasting things it did was to create literacy everywhere, because as people stood in the public square and heard Joe what's-his-name read the theses or read the first chapter of Genesis or whatever he was reading, people said, I could do that. I think I'm gonna learn the alphabet. No one well, books had been locked away in a few closets in universities and rich men's houses. Nobody had seen books. There was no way of people's, it wasn't that they were being prevented from seeing them, it's just that they were such precious objects.
And this book is Heretics and Heroes, How Renaissance Artists and Reformation Priests Created Our World. The author is Thomas Cahill. Tom, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Chauncey.